18th, 1998. The standoff in the Persian Gulf shows no signs of easing. International disagreement begins a slow downward spiral towards war. Looming off the coast of Iraq, nothing conveys the threat of that war more clearly than the presence of the mammoth supercarriers. Of course, the ship's large size also makes them large targets. But they carry their own protection, the F-14 Tomcat. It is the fleet defender. Whenever carriers anchor off foreign shores, the Tomcat is the first airplane off the deck. It is one of the most powerful aircraft ever designed, one of America's top guns in an air-to-air dogfight.
You can get it going about 550 knots, pointed 70 degrees straight up, and it goes from 5,000 feet at 0.9 Mach all the way up to 35,000 feet when you just stop because that's far enough.
You have an improved radar system in there and a whole bunch of other systems that give it a better fighting capability.
When fully loaded for battle, the Tomcat can weigh nearly 30 tons. That's because it carries the Phoenix, the heaviest air-to-air missile in the American arsenal. With it, the Tomcat can take out targets up to 100 miles away. The Phoenix was originally designed to counter Soviet bombers and the nuclear missiles they carried. The Tomcats were sent out to intercept these big airplanes time and again during the Cold War. Today, this threat has disappeared, but now the Tomcat's job has gotten much more complicated. They can no longer just launch missiles from 100 miles away. To protect the carriers and the airplanes they bear, the Tomcats will circle the battle group, standing guard against danger. It's known as Combat Air Patrol, or CAP. A pair of Tomcats are kept in reserve, ready to launch from the flight deck if the F-14s aloft get in trouble. Overseeing the fighter patrol is an airborne command center, the E-2C Hawkeye. It's the Navy's version of the AWACS, a high-tech radar and communications airplane, an electronic eye in the sky. Inside, a team of specialists keep watch for intruders. If anything suspicious is detected, the Hawkeye will scramble the Tomcats, sending them out for a closer look. The action will all take place hundreds of miles away from the carriers. In today's split-second world, the fleet can't wait for an intruder to announce his intentions. Anti-ship missiles have a range of over 20 miles, and they can be deadly. So the Tomcat must confront the intruder far from the fleet. But up close, the F-14 has a problem. Its long-range missiles are useless. This is not the first time the Navy has encountered this dilemma. Back in the Vietnam War, the Tomcat's predecessor, the F-4 Phantom, was the most sophisticated fighter the Navy had. Its formidable missiles could take out targets dozens of miles away. Early on, the Navy decided the Phantom would never get close enough to enemy airplanes to need a machine gun. That proved to be a deadly mistake. Navy Phantoms found themselves locked in close, hard-turning dogfights. Without the guns that might have made the difference. The agile enemy MiGs had all the advantage at close range. As for the Phantom's elaborate missiles, they just didn't work. The weapons couldn't handle the jarring nature of jet combat, and with each takeoff and landing, their electronics were literally shaken to pieces. Even when the Phantom could place a MiG in its sights, the missiles would miss time and again. For all the sophisticated technology of the U.S. fighters, by the war's end, just as many Phantom as MiG pilots had been killed in combat. For the Navy, it was a terrible blow. American flyers vowed they'd never make such a mistake again. Naval aviators adopted new training methods, new tactics. The Navy developed the famous Top Gun School in Southern California in the late 60s and continued to expand its lessons. Today, it remains the world's most renowned academy for mid-air combat skills, a school for dogfighting. The Navy set out to improve not just the pilots, but the airplanes too. They began to develop an air-to-air fighter capable of carrying a larger and heavier assortment of weapons, an airplane that would be faster and more maneuverable than the Phantom. The result? The F-14 Tomcat. Could an airplane even larger than the Phantom be more agile, more versatile? Designers came up with a new idea, the swing wing. On a fast approach, the Tomcat's wings can sweep back. During a hard-turning dogfight, the wings move into forward position. Yet for all the advances, no one was sure if the electronics of this new age would prove any more reliable than their predecessors from the Vietnam War. The proof would come in an unlikely place. In August 1982, the 6th Fleet was conducting exercises near Libya's Gulf of Sidra. Relations between the U.S. and Libya had been strained for months. Commander Henry Lehman and Lieutenant Lawrence Morzewski were on combat air patrol over the so-called Line of Death at the height of tensions. For weeks, Libyan aircraft had been flying nearby, darting in and out of the battle group's airspace. Then, 2 unidentified airplanes ventured even closer, too close for comfort. The Tomcats were ordered in, and suddenly, things got very scary very quickly. A Libyan missile flew by, and a dogfight was on. The Tomcats fought hard to get the enemy in their sights. Then they let fly Sidewinder missiles. The F-14 Tomcat had earned its stripes. It had entered the combat zone and come back a winner. In the following years, the Tomcat would get yet another role and a new nickname, the Bombcat. Transformed from interceptor to a strike role, the F-14 received some new technology. The Bombcat was now able to pick out targets on the ground with a new laser-guided targeting system, the Lantern Strike Pod. Today, the high-tech electronics of the Lantern give the Bombcat precision guidance for its bombs. it's all controlled by the man in the back seat, the radar intercept officer, or RIO.
Lantern pod is fairly new to the Tomcat community. We just got it in the last year or so. It allows all Tomcats to have a precision strike capability, allows us to get a FLIR image and then put precision-guided munitions on it via laser designation.
Technological advances like the Lantern have made the pilot and co-pilot's job much easier, but not any safer. Few professions are as hazardous as that of the Navy flyers. And here in the Gulf, as tensions begin to flare, the Sea Wings find themselves once again on the cutting edge of action. January 28, 1998. 4 weeks into the mission in the Gulf, for Lieutenant Aiello and the other pilots of the Sea Wings, the call to action may come at any moment. Each day finds them heading out on patrol in the Persian Gulf. Even before the combat starts, every day is a risk. As the pilots know, with every flight, the survival of the entire ship is in their hands. A miscalculation of a few feet on a routine landing or takeoff can prove fatal.
You have no chance to make a mistake. You make a mistake to kill not only you and your RIO, but maybe other people on the flight deck.
There is nothing cavalier about flying a $30 million airplane with high-tech explosives. Pilots take their job very seriously. And this morning, as every morning, it all starts in the briefing room.
What you don't see in movies like Top Gun or any of these specials a lot of times are what goes on before and after the flights.
Briefings map out the missions for the day. On any morning in the Gulf, Aiello and his fellow pilots might be patrolling Iraqi borders or enforcing the no-fly zone.
We don't just go out and tool around looking for a job. We have specific things we try to accomplish. We also talk about safety. We talk about contingencies, anything that might happen, whether somebody ejects, maybe somebody has to go land somewhere other than on the ship. And then we cover any questions anyone might have, and we get in and actually go do the mission.
As the clock ticks down, pilots and crew don G-suits.
This piece of gear helps us withstand G-forces that we're going to experience when we're flying. Looks basically like a set of pants that fit snugly. They have a bunch of bladders in them that will actually inflate when we're experiencing G-forces, and that helps keep blood from pooling in the lower portions of our bodies. They're actually quite comfy.
Then it's time to head up to the flight deck.
We have procedures that we need to follow to make sure everything happens correctly and to ensure our safety and those on the flight deck. We have checklists that we follow just to make sure that certain things are in certain places. A flap switch, for example. I want to make sure my ejection seat is armed in case I need it.
Before each flight, the pilots have roughly 45 minutes to complete all checks. Then it's time for action. The pilot mounts up and awaits word from the primary flight operations center. When the air boss gives the go-ahead, the aircraft taxis to the CAT, the catapult that will fling it skyward. The pilot maneuvers near the shoe, the connection that links the aircraft to the steam catapult. Then, the complex choreography begins. A member of the launch crew hooks the airplane up to the shoe with a holdback unit. When enough force is exerted against it, this small unit will release the aircraft from the catapult. Huge retracting blast panels rise from the deck to deflect the violent jet exhaust away from other aircraft. The shooters get ready to launch. The catapult pressure is set. and the pilot accelerates the engine to full power. A flight deck director gives the go-ahead.
We're also looking in the heads-up display, or what we call the HUD, to make sure we have enough airspeed to fly. Speed is life, so we need at least a minimum of approximately 150 knots, so 160 miles an hour, so to speak, to make sure that the aircraft is going to have enough lift available to fly away.
The pilot gives a final all-clear salute, and the catapult launch button is pushed. They call it punching off the deck. The airplane accelerates from 0 to 160 in less than a second, shot off the carrier and into the sky. The launch pins the crew back in their seats with a force many times that of gravity. Even for the most senior pilot, takeoff is an experience unlike any other.
It's an incredible shock and pressure on the body. It's something that'll scare you to death on your first shot. I remember my first shot out, actually my first couple of cat launches, you'd hear other guys accidentally click the radio and just screaming all the way down the chute as they come off.
Within moments, the aircraft is miles away from the carrier, clearing the way for other jets to take off. And the drama of the carrier launch is repeated again and again.
Usually that's pretty fun. It's like a roller coaster ride. We enjoy it. There's not much that we can do about it, so we just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Here in the Gulf, the big supercarriers are outfitted with 3 catapults. Jets launch one after another, even side by side, in rapid-fire succession, up to one every 30 seconds. The airplane accelerates from 0 to 100. The shooters get ready to launch. The catapult pressure is set, and the pilot accelerates the engine to full power. A flight deck director gives the go-ahead.
We're also looking in the heads-up display, or what we call the HUD, to make sure we have enough airspeed to fly. Speed is life, so we need at least a minimum of approximately 150 knots, so 160 miles an hour, so to speak, to make sure that the aircraft is going to have enough lift available to fly away.
The pilot gives a final all-clear salute, and the catapult launch button is pushed. They call it punching off the deck. The airplane accelerates from 0 to 160 in less than a second, shot off the carrier and into the sky. The launch pins the crew back in their seats with a force many times that of gravity. Even for the most senior pilot, takeoff is an experience unlike any other.
It's an incredible shock and pressure on the body. It's something that'll scare you to death on your first shot. I remember my first shot out, actually my first couple of cat launches, you'd hear other guys accidentally click the radio and just screaming all the way down the chute as they come off.
Within moments, the aircraft is miles away from the carrier, clearing the way for other jets to take off. And the drama of the carrier launch is repeated again and again.
Usually that's pretty fun. It's like a roller coaster ride. We enjoy it. There's not much that we can do about it, so we just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Here in the Gulf, the big supercarriers are outfitted with 3 catapults. Jets launch one after another, even side by side, in rapid fire.
Pilot and the
All claim live. Responsible for clearing the way for other maneuvers near the shoe.
We have procedures that we need to follow to make sure, so 160
Catapults are specialists in takeoffs and landings. One green team handles the launch. What would happen without them?
Truthfully, it's pretty fun. It's like a roller coaster ride. We enjoy it. There's not much that we can do about it, so we just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Here in the Gulf, the big supercarriers are outfitted with 3 catapults. Jets launch one after another, even side by side, in rapid-fire succession, up to one every 30 seconds. Its own assigned brown shirt. They make sure it's mission ready. Blue shirts are airplane handlers, responsible for moving aircraft on deck. Yellow shirts are flight deck directors, the traffic cops of the carrier. They instruct pilots when and where to move their airplanes. Green shirts are specialists in takeoffs and landings. One green team handles the launch, fastening the aircraft to the catapult. The other greens work the landing, keeping an eye on the arrestor line at the stern of the ship. The purple shirts, nicknamed grapes, fuel the aircraft. And the red shirts are in charge of the explosives, bombs, missiles, and any other type of weapon the mission may require. As the carrier crews in the Gulf send the next squadron skyward, the deck bustles with chaotic energy that makes it one of the most hazardous locations on Earth. Tons and tons of explosives, jets full of bombs and inflammable fuel, maneuvering within inches of one another on a narrow deck. And there's more.
Real dangerous because you can have static electricity can set off some of your explosives.
To walk here in the shadows of these aircraft is to tempt fate. Powerful engines suck up tremendous volumes of air and have been known to lift sailors right off the deck and pull them into the engine's rotating turbine blades.
I have an instinct of where I know I can be and where I can't, and where the dangerous situations are.
The sheer volume of noise makes speech impossible. Hand gestures have become the language of carrier operations. Beyond the constant barrage of noise and heat, there's the basic stress of a crewman's life. Operating at high speed, with little sleep, in unforgiving conditions, there's not much room for error. Because here, almost any mistake might lead to injury or death. The key is to make sure slip-ups don't turn into casualties. Failed takeoffs, botched landings, they can all claim lives. And when an F-14 recently crashed into the deck of a carrier, it took an heroic effort to contain the damage, to ensure the crash claimed no victims. For when accidents occur, when fire sears the deck, a few brave men and women are standing on guard, ready to save lives in a race against death. On the deck of a supercarrier, there isn't much latitude for mistakes. But with so many tons of metal and explosives racing by, with all the crewmen toiling in extreme heat or cold, accidents are bound to happen. In 1997, disaster struck the deck of the USS Kitty Hawk as it patrolled the waters of the Pacific. An EA-68 Prowler taxied into position for launch. At the same time, Lieutenant John Gibb was taking off the deck of the USS Constellation in his SA-60 helicopter. Moments later, a distress call came from the Kitty Hawk.
There was a Prowler that had an engine malfunction or something like that, and ended up, the aircrew had to eject out of the aircraft itself.
Seconds after launch, the 4-man crew of the Prowler had bailed out into the sea. An ejection following takeoff is brutal on the human body. First, you travel from 0 to 160 in less than a second. Then, you are suddenly shot 300 feet up into the air by an explosive under your seat. By the time you hit the water, the shock and exhaustion may leave you stunned and paralyzed. Luckily, the saving angels of the flight deck, the helicopters, are often nearby.
We'll basically remain anywhere within 10 miles of the aircraft carrier anytime there's a launch or recovery cycle, case the jet has a problem, the pilots need to eject, we're there to pick them out of the water.
The 4 Prowler crewmen needed help, desperately. Most of the helicopters were unavailable, but Lieutenant Gibb was close enough to lend a hand.
There's a pilot in the water. What we'll do is come down to a 10-knot hover. Swimmer will jump out of the aircraft. We'll come up to 60 feet, hover there. Swimmer will go over, check out the pilots, make sure they're good, bring them over, and then we have a rescue hoist on the other side where we'll just lift the pilot and our swimmer back into the aircraft and bring him back aboard the carrier if he needs medical attention.
The waves were choppy, the crosswind strong as Lieutenant Gibb brought his helicopter into position. Sending down a line, he plucked the crewmen from the ocean. Battered, bruised, but still alive, they were transported back to the Kitty Hawk and then on to Balboa Medical Hospital. The presence of Gibb and the choppers meant the difference between life and death for the Prowler pilots.
And it's a wonderful feeling, it's a rewarding feeling when you know that something has gone very wrong and people will die if you don't react quickly and accurately. And we were there on time, on top, and pulled that individual out of the water, saved his life. So we're honored and pleased to do that.
The helicopters are always on guard, keeping an eye out for danger. But for the pilots, the greatest threats lie inland. January 31st, 1998. Time is running out. Last-ditch diplomatic efforts are underway in Baghdad. Now, Lieutenant Aiello and the pilots must contemplate the very real possibility of war. For years, they've been training for the toughest challenge, the lightning-quick tempo of the dogfight. As the pilots say, if you have time to think, it's too late.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Sometimes if you're coming head-to-head with another aircraft, there could be as many as 1,000 or over knots of closure. Okay, so 1,000 miles an hour, things are happening very quickly, as you can imagine.
Air-to-air combat is a split-second roller coaster ride with no time for second thoughts, no margin for error.
We have timelines, kind of like a checklist in a way that tells us, okay, at this range, we need to do this thing to make sure we have an offensive merge if we do get to a merge with another aircraft. And so that's something that we have to think about. It's very, very dynamic when we're doing air-to-air.
But now, as each minute brings them closer to an attack on Iraq, the greatest peril is not mid-air combat. Hussein's Air Force was all but devastated in Desert Storm. The big threat now is the array of deadly radar-guided missiles. With each sortie out over Iraqi territory, the Sea Wings confront hundreds of missile sites spread out across the desert. The key to the Iraqi defense is radar. Iraqi radar capabilities are a web, a huge electronic network strung out along its borders. Radar will tip off the Iraqis to impending attack. Radar will guide their surface-to-air missiles. But the Sea Wings have a weapon to counter Iraqi radar, the EA-68 Prowler, the anti-radar airplane. Today's warfare is based on high-tech electronics, and the Prowler guards the fleet by taking out those electronics. The Prowler's role is to win the high-tech information war on which all the rest of the fighting will be based.
We support the rest of the air wing by trying to gain superiority in all the electronic emission spectrum. We can jam enemy radars. We can also shoot a type of missile to suppress enemy radars as well. And by that, by doing that, we allow the rest of the air wing to complete its mission undetected, basically.
If an assault is called, the Prowler will strike first, either jamming Iraqi radar electronically or firing a harm missile to actually destroy the radar site. Then comes the next wave of the assault, the F-18 Hornet. Today, the Hornet stands as the workhorse of the U.S. Navy. It is not only one of the best air-to-air fighters, it is equally effective at bombing too.
The F-18 is a multi-purpose strike fighter aircraft. We can escort ourselves into a combat zone using the air-to-air radar to take out any kind of interceptors that might be defending the target. We can then drop our bomb or deliver our ordnance and then return and also defend on the way out.
The Hornet is the jack of all trades. Unlike the Tomcat, it was always designed to handle both mid-air combat and ground strikes as well. And pilots like Lieutenant Aiello have long been impressed with the abilities of this airplane.
The F-18 is the premier air-to-air fighter today. It carries the AMRAAM missile as well as the Sparrow and the Sidewinder missiles.
The Hornet's ability as both fighter and bomber means that one day soon, it may completely replace the Tomcat. Screaming across the skies of the Persian Gulf, the Hornet's abilities are clear. This fixed-wing airplane is cheaper, smaller, more maneuverable, and it packs a deadly punch. The easiest way to distinguish the Hornet from the Tomcat is the tail. The Hornet has a V-shaped tail. The Tomcat stabilizers are straight up vertical. But the Hornet's most distinctive feature is the lack of a co-pilot.
It's easy for one person to do everything we need to do for that reason. And we do have all the information that we need without the second person to operate it, because then when you have a second person, there's always that possibility of communication breakdown. Maybe you're not seeing what he's seeing, maybe he's not telling you what you need to know. So there's a possibility that two people could work less efficiently than one.
Nonetheless, the Hornet pilots face one hard truth. They fly alone. There is no backup. In the heat of battle, they're by themselves. And so they must concentrate harder, work faster, execute more efficiently. Their only companion is a checklist.
When we're doing an air-to-ground mission, we also have a checklist, a timeline. If we're 20 miles away from a target, there's certain things we want to do in the cockpit to make sure we're ready to persecute any given target, be it a tank, a bridge, a hangar, whatever it is. And as we get ready to deliver the ordnance, then we're doing certain things to make sure it happens.
As the clock runs down, as an assault on Iraq begins to look more and more imminent, how will Lieutenant Aiello fare? How will the Hornet survive the threat of Hussein's surface-to-air missiles? The Sea Wings are hoping that a new weapon will provide the answer. February 14th, 1998. As frantic diplomatic efforts try to break the stalemate, critical minutes are ticking by. The Gulf hovers at the point of no return. Airplanes are scrambling into the air, ready to launch an attack when the order comes in. In the battle for air dominance, the fight will turn on the Hornet's ability to take out Saddam Hussein's large supply of surface-to-air missiles. In the past, aircraft like the Hornet would have had to come within range of these missiles to drop their bombs. Today, Hornet pilots have new weapons which can give them a powerful long-range punch. The ability to strike from beyond the reach of danger. A new type of ordnance known as standoff weapons. The most potent is the JSOW, the Joint Standoff Weapon. When an attack on Iraq is finally ordered, Hornets will fly in and drop these JSOWs more than 40 miles from their targets, clearly out of range of any ground-based threat. As a JSOW drops, small wings pop out from its side to give it additional lift. Aiming is done in a revolutionary way, not by eyesight, but electronically, with the help of global positioning satellites above. There is no steering. The bomb is locked onto its target even before launch. This is computer-guided devastation.
We can now use GPS coordinates to get a bomb less than 5 feet away from a target and drop it from very high altitudes and very long ranges, which protects the pilot, keeps us out of harm's way if the target is defended by surface-to-air missiles. With technology getting as good as it is today, we can drop these from very long ranges, turn around and run, and the bomb's going to take care of business on its own.
But as weapons get more sophisticated, Hornet pilots like Aiello will need more sophisticated aircraft to carry them. The Navy is developing two new versions of the Hornet, the F-A-18E and the F-Super Hornet, one a single-seater, the other a two-seater. the $35 million Hornet has been substantially redesigned. The wing area has been increased to carry more bombs. The engines have been improved to give the Super Hornet greater range, and new electronics have been added to help guide more sophisticated weapons. The Super Hornet has completed its last round of testing, and the Navy expects it to be deployed early in the 21st century. As the Navy and the Air Force prepare for the future, they have two very different philosophies. The Air Force believes in stealth aircraft like the F-22 Raptor. The Navy has given up on this technology. They feel that electronic sensors will soon be sophisticated enough to detect stealth airplanes. That's why they're opting for ever more long-range firepower. But as the strike force in the Gulf goes into its final state of readiness, they're joined by yet another remarkable airplane, the Harrier jump jet. The Harrier is the ultimate aircraft for getting in and out of tight spots. It doesn't need a catapult or a runway. The Marine Corps loves this airplane because of one special feature. With the rotating nozzles under its wings, the Harrier is the only aircraft that can take off and land vertically. The Harrier was invented by the same country that created the first aircraft carrier, Great Britain. From the beginning, the United Kingdom has been a staunch supporter of a tough stance against Iraq. The British carrier Invincible has been patrolling the waters of the Persian Gulf alongside its 3 U.S. counterparts. When it comes to carrier operations, they're nothing new for the British. They developed the first carrier during World War I and led the way in carrier design for much of the Second World War. But in recent times, as supercarriers have become more and more expensive, the British have designed smaller, more efficient carriers, like the HMS Illustrious. The Illustrious is too small to operate high-performance fighters like the Hornet and the Tomcat. The small deck simply can't handle the powerful steam catapults of American carriers. And so Britain pioneered the use of the Harrier. Its unique vertical takeoff makes it the most maneuverable airplane there is. But that takeoff also guzzles massive amounts of fuel. So the airplane conserves energy with another method, a sloping ramp that pops it into the air. That's why they call the Harrier the jump jet.
But the ramp's designed to ballistically propel you airborne, and then once the aircraft gathers enough speed, the aircraft's wing then develops a lift, which then puts you into what everybody else knows as conventional flight.
No matter the takeoff, there's only one way to land the Harrier, and that's vertically, dropping straight down. The control and configuration of the nozzle system is extremely complex. The slightest miscalculation can cause one nozzle to put out more thrust than the other, literally causing the Harrier to flip over and crash. But landing any airplane at sea is dangerous business. Just imagine trying to put down 20 tons of metal, explosives, and fuel on a moving target. A target rolling and pitching with the waves. For the pilots of the Tomcat, Hornet, and Prowler, it's a daily challenge when they sweat out a carrier landing. Naval aviators call it the controlled crash. Slamming down onto the hard steel deck, just barely on the edge of control, and hoping that the hook won't miss the wire. As Lieutenant Aiello returns from his mission, as he leads the squadron back in towards the carrier deck, he knows all too well the dangers ahead.
We have certain procedures that we follow, and we want to be in the right place, in the right piece of sky, at the right time, with the right attitude on the aircraft, which means the airspeed. And what happens when we hit the wires is just a controlled chaos. The wire brings you to a screeching halt in about 250 feet from 145 knots to 0. And the whole time your inertia is throwing you forward. You're feeling the strain of the straps and the pull on the wire.
It's the biggest rush. No matter how old or young you are, your knees will always knock. It's the scariest thing coming on the board, even for the most experienced pilot.
Aiello begins his final approach. Too slow, he crashes short of the deck. Too fast, he hurtles off the deck. He must hit the bullseye as it shifts back and forth, heaving up and down in all weather conditions. The paddles guide him in, signaling electronically up to the jet. The task is not for the meek. Unlike the launch, where the pilot has no control, during the landing, his fate is in his own hands. And no matter how many times you've done it, every landing is a test.
Carrier landing is a highly dynamic time. It's something that we are totally in control of. The catapult launch is completely different. We hook up, we're along for the ride. When it's time to land, I've got to maneuver the aircraft, solely up to me, with the throttle, the stick, the foot rudder pedals, the whole bit.
A pilot has two main tasks: land in position to catch the arrestor wire and counter the rolling motion of the sea. No flying requires more courage. And the mission is over only when the jet catches the wire. Navy pilots call it a trap. And this time, for Lieutenant Aiello, the trap is good. Yet as night falls, the rest of the squadron is still airborne. This is the ultimate test of an aviator. Carrier maneuvers after dark.
Some say the shot at night is the scariest thing because you're going from somewhat of a lighted deck here to pitch blackness with minimal airspeed on the aircraft. Speed is life. Not enough off the end can kill you.
One by one, the pilots return. As night turns into morning, they've all made it back safely. And this morning, there is momentous news. While no bombs were dropped and not a single shot fired, the Sea Wing show of power has in fact accomplished their mission. In the face of the supercarrier's overwhelming display of force, Saddam Hussein has backed down. At the 11th hour, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has mediated an agreement with Hussein. With such a large amount of military strength arrayed against him, Hussein has agreed to comply with UN demands for weapons inspections. The big stick has been brandished, and the enemy has backed down. At least for now. But as the months and years go by, the supercarriers and the Sea Wings will find themselves back on duty once more. And once more, wherever danger appears, they will be there, floating citadels, movable islands of war, ruling the waves and the skies above.